August 1943. A thick haze settles over occupied France. Farmers working near the town of Chartres pause as a distant roar breaks the monotony of summer. Through the clouds, a silver shape tumbles. Smoking, crippled, yet massive. It's not a German aircraft, it's something else. An American P-47 Thunderbolt, far from home, its engine coughing out black smoke as the pilot fights to keep it level. Moments later, the giant machine skids across a wheat field, plowing deep furrows before coming to rest in silence. Within hours, Luftwaffe recovery teams arrive. For them, this is no wreck, it's a treasure. They've heard rumors of this new American fighter, the flying tank, the Jug. They've seen its devastation on the Eastern Front and over Italy, but never up close. The remains are cordoned off, guarded like a state secret. Inside the twisted fuselage lies a 2,000 horsepower engine, unlike anything Germany has built. To Berlin, it's a trophy. To one man, Oberleutnant Werner Schultz, it will become a revelation, Werner, and a quiet nightmare. Schultz is a technical officer, not a soldier. He spent the war studying Allied machinery, dissecting every bolt and cable, searching for flaws. But as he walks around the P-47's scorched frame, he already senses something different. This isn't just another captured aircraft. This is industrial supremacy made visible, a symbol of a war Germany can no longer win. The wreck of the P-47 Thunderbolt now sits inside a hangar on the outskirts of Paris. Under the pale light of an August morning, Oberleutnant Werner Schultz begins his examination. To his left, Luftwaffe technicians pry open the engine cowling, expecting the familiar sight of tangled pipes and broken valves. Instead, they stare in silence. What emerges from the metal frame is not chaos, it's precision. Every line, every weld, every bolt seems deliberate, engineered with a confidence that unsettles them. Schultz leans closer, brushing the soot from the engine plate. Pratt and Whitney are 2800 double Wasp. A radial engine. Massive, intricate, alien in its complexity. He circles it slowly, taking notes. The cylinders are perfectly machined, evenly spaced, built to tolerances that would make any German inspector frown. Even after a crash landing, the assembly remains largely intact, as if it refuses to die. He peers deeper and freezes. Behind the engine lies a maze of ducts and pipes leading to a turbo-supercharger system, unlike anything the Reich possesses. It channels exhaust gases through turbines to compress intake air, maintaining full power at altitudes where German engines suffocate. Schultz whispers to himself, "We could design this, but we could never build it." Around him, other officers murmur approval, but he feels none. For the first time, the engineer sees not just an aircraft, but the truth behind it, a nation whose factories have become its greatest weapon. On the third day of examination, the wreck is stripped bare. The wings lie on one side, the fuselage on another. And in the center of the hangar, under the glow of a single lamp, stands the engine, the heart of the American war machine. Pratt and Whitney are 2800 double Wasp, 18 cylinders arranged in two perfect rows, 2,000 horsepower at takeoff, sustained through a climb to 30,000 feet. It is not elegant, it is not light, but it is indestructible. Schultz studies the cross-section drawings, his gloved hand tracing the cooling fins, the precision-forged pistons, the seamless transitions between alloys. German engines, the Daimler-Benz 605, the BMW 801, are feats of design, but they demand craftsmanship, finesse, human perfection. This engine demands industry. He notes the surface treatment on every bolt, anti-corrosion coatings, rare metals used in abundance. He checks tolerances with a gauge, the variation, less than 1/10,000th of an inch. In Germany, that level of precision would mean weeks of manual labor. Here, it means mass production. He writes in his logbook, "The Americans build engines as if they expect to lose them, and simply replace them." Around him, the mechanics whisper admiration, but Schultz feels something colder. Envy mixed with dread. Every spark plug, every fuel line, every cylinder speaks the same truth. America can afford perfection. Germany can only admire it. As Schultz moves toward the rear of the airframe, he encounters the true enigma of the Thunderbolt. A tangle of tubes, turbines, and valves. A mechanical labyrinth stretching from the engine bay to the tail section. It takes hours before he realizes what he's looking at. It's not damage, it's design. The P-47's turbo-supercharger system, the secret to its unmatched high-altitude power. It captures exhaust gases, channels them through turbines, and uses the energy to compress fresh air back into the engine. Every German officer in the hangar knows what this means. Constant horsepower at 30,000 feet. The American fighter can climb, dive, and fight where their own engines suffocate. Schultz kneels beside the turbine housing, tracing the smooth welds, the alloy tubing polished like surgical steel. Each component is built with metals Germany can no longer afford. Inconel, chromium, nickel. He knows their factories can't replicate it. The smelters in the Ruhr are already starving. Synthetic replacements warp, crack, or burn under the same pressure. He closes his notebook and stares through the fuselage. The realization settles like lead in his chest. Even if we stole it, he whispers, we couldn't build it. This isn't an aircraft built by a nation straining for survival. It's built by a nation with limitless power, industrial, material, and human. For Schultz, the inspection is no longer technical. It's existential. By the fourth day, Schultz has dismantled enough of the Thunderbolt to fill 2 tables with parts. He doesn't see chaos, he sees a philosophy. Every component is designed for mass production. The bolts are standardized, the panels interchangeable, the wiring harness labeled in English and color-coded for assembly line workers. It is as if the aircraft was built by thousands of hands that never saw the sky. He looks back at the Luftwaffe mechanics, craftsmen, not laborers. Every German aircraft requires artisans, men who shape aluminum by instinct, who adjust valves by feel. Their work is beautiful, but slow. Each Messerschmitt 109 or Focke-Wulf 190 is a masterpiece. And a bottleneck. The Americans build machines that build machines. Germany builds artists who build aircraft. Schultz writes in his report, their strength lies not in innovation, but in repetition, a weaponized simplicity. He pauses, realizing what that means. If one Thunderbolt falls, 10 more will replace it within days. If one German fighter burns, it will take weeks, maybe months, to rebuild. The war, he thinks, isn't being lost in the air. It's being lost in the factories, and no amount of courage, skill, or sacrifice can outfly mathematics. For the first time, the engineer feels something he never expected to associate with his profession, fear. The deeper Schultz goes into the wreck, the more the Thunderbolt begins to resemble something unnatural. Not a plane, but a fortress built to fly. He studies the fuselage structure, tracing his hand across the skin of the aircraft. The aluminum plating is thick, double riveted, reinforced with crossbeams. Underneath, layers of armor steel shield the cockpit and fuel lines, protection so heavy that on paper the plane should barely get off the ground. And yet, it flies. The Luftwaffe's fighters, the Bf-109s and Fw-190s, are built around speed, elegance, precision. The P-47 is built around endurance. 8 tons of metal and firepower that can take hits and keep climbing. He notes bullet impacts that failed to penetrate, fuel tanks that sealed themselves after being pierced. Even after crash landing, the wings remain attached. Half the instruments inside the cockpit still function. Schultz circles it in silence. This isn't a work of art. It's an act of defiance against physics. He looks at the radial engine again, burned yet still intact, and murmurs, "You can't kill this thing." To the German engineers, it's grotesque, heavy, overbuilt, crude. To Schultz, it's genius. Because for every flaw in beauty, the Americans found strength in survival. And for the first time, he realizes that war isn't about the perfect machine. It's about the machine that refuses to die. Schultz sits at his desk, surrounded by blueprints and fragments of the Thunderbolt's engine. On the table, two sets of data. One labeled Pratt and Whitney R 2800, the other BMW 801D. Two worlds drawn in ink. The American radial engine delivers 2,000 horsepower, sustained hour after hour, without tearing itself apart. The BMW struggles to hold 1,700 for more than minutes before overheating. On paper, the difference seems modest, 300 horsepower. In the sky, it's decisive. He does the math carefully. At 30,000 feet, the German fighters lose 30% of their power. The P-47, thanks to its turbo-supercharger, loses none. That means an American pilot can climb higher, dive faster, and stay longer in the fight. At altitude, the Thunderbolt becomes something terrifying. Not agile, but unstoppable. Schultz writes in his report, "It is not a plane. It is a statement that power can replace elegance." He flips through factory data. Hundreds of engines produced every week. Each one identical, interchangeable, reliable. In Germany, even the best engines require calibration by hand, every unit a work of fragile perfection. He looks up, expression blank. They build strength by the ton. We build pride by the kilogram. For the first time, he no longer feels admiration, only the quiet certainty that Germany is outnumbered by horsepower itself. It takes Schultz 3 more days to finish his calculations. They're not about flight performance or maneuverability. They're about numbers. Numbers that no strategy, no courage, no miracle can change. He opens the official American production data captured by German intelligence. 500 P-47 Thunderbolts per month. 12 factories producing R2800 engines, each turning out more than 10,000 units a year. The total plan, 125,000 engines. Enough to replace every single aircraft lost in combat, 5 times over. Schultz stares at the figures, disbelieving. Even if Germany destroyed 10 Thunderbolts a day, America could replace them before the wreckage cooled. He sketches 2 graphs, one for German production, one for American. The German line rises and falls like a heartbeat. The American one, an unstoppable climb. He turns to a colleague and says quietly, "This isn't a war of soldiers anymore. It's a war of steel, oil, and electricity." The colleague laughs uneasily. "Then we'll simply build faster," he says. Schultz doesn't reply. He knows the truth. Germany can't. The factory's bombed, the fuel scarce, the labor force shattered by conscription. And yet, Berlin still talks about secret weapons, about miracle jets, and vengeance rockets. He closes the report folder and writes one final line in the margin: "Mathematics has no ideology." The numbers have already chosen the victor for the first time. The engineer feels not fear and awe, but inevitability. A quiet scientific despair that no general could ever understand. September 1943. In a gray office building in Paris, Schultz finishes typing his final report. 37 pages of detailed analysis, metallurgy, production methods, logistical output. No opinions, no speculation, just numbers, the kind that speak for themselves. He signs it. Oberleutnant Werner Schultz, Technical Evaluation Division. The report is sealed, stamped, urgent, to Reichsluftfahrtministerium, Berlin. 2 weeks later, he's summoned. A colonel from Berlin sits behind the desk, reading his report with a frown deep enough to swallow the page. "Your conclusions," the colonel says slowly, "suggest defeat." Schultz replies calmly, "They suggest Reality, sir. Silence. The colonel leans back. You write that the Americans are producing 500 aircraft per month. Yes, sir. That they can replace every loss instantly. Yes. That the war is unwinnable? Not unwinnable, Schultz says softly, just already decided. The colonel closes the folder. Engineer Schultz, do you know what we call men who think like that? Schultz answers without hesitation. Realists. The colonel's eyes narrow. No, we call them defeatists. Within days, Schultz's report is shelved, marked technically accurate but politically unacceptable. Copies are destroyed. He's reassigned to an engine testing facility in Bavaria. At night, he still dreams of the P-47, that monstrous, perfect machine. And in the roar of its engine, he hears not power, but prophecy, a prophecy his superiors refuse to read. Winter, 1943. Snow drifts through the shattered windows of Schultz's new assignment, an engine test facility outside Augsburg. The air smells of oil and exhaustion. Each morning he walks past rows of silent fuselages, aircraft without engines, engines without fuel. The Reich still speaks of victory. But the factories speak louder. He receives the latest production summary. Output down by 30%. Steel shipments delayed. Synthetic fuel reserves nearly gone. He runs his finger across the numbers line by line, each one a death notice for an idea. In the evenings, the Allied bombers pass overhead. The sky shakes, the ground trembles. The test benches rattle like coffins. He watches through the cracked window as the horizon burns orange. He doesn't look away anymore. On his desk lies a single surviving copy of his report, corner scorched from a nearby blast. He reads it again, silently, like a prayer. Every prediction and production loss, material shortage, supply collapse has come true. He once wrote these numbers as analysis. Now they're prophecy fulfilled. Outside, an officer shouts orders, "Move the prototypes! The Americans are coming!" Schultz doesn't move. He simply closes the report, presses his hand against the cover, and whispers, "The war was lost long before we began to fight it." The lights flicker. Somewhere in the distance, a factory collapses. And for the first time, the engineer understands. Truth makes no sound when it's buried beneath ideology. Germany, 1946. The war is over. In a gray windowless room in Oberursel, American officers conduct technical debriefings of captured Luftwaffe engineers. Among them, Werner Schultz. His uniform is gone, only the notebook remains. Across the table, a U.S. major asks questions in calm, deliberate English. "When did you first realize the war could not be won?" Schultz hesitates, then replies, "When I saw the engine." The major leans forward. "The P-47? "Yes," Schultz says quietly. "It was not just an aircraft. It was a measurement of power." He explains how German factories could barely produce enough aluminum for monthly quotas, while American plants stamped out engines like clockwork. He recalls the supercharger system, the mass production, the alloys they could never refine. As he speaks, the Americans take notes, not to accuse, but to understand. One officer asks, "Why didn't you tell your superiors sooner?" Schultz gives a faint smile. "We did. But truth in Germany was like oxygen at 30,000 feet. The higher you went, the less there was." Silence fills the room. No anger, no excuses. Just the sound of pens scratching on paper. The war has ended, but the mathematics remains. He folds his hands and adds one last line to his testimony. "We were brilliant engineers, serving blind men." For the Americans, it's confirmation. For Schultz, it's absolution and a life sentence of memory. The war ends, but the machines remain. The P-47s that once thundered over Europe are now lined up in rows, silent, their wings folded. Factories that once produced engines by the thousand now turned to automobiles, refrigerators, and jetliners. The same tools that crushed empires will now build a new world. In a small village in Bavaria, Werner Schultz lives quietly. He repairs watches, the only machines left small enough for him to control. Occasionally, he reads reports of American air power, of factories stretching for miles, of bombers that never needed to refuel. Each article reminds him of the same truth: the war was never between nations, it was between systems. In 1943, he measured horsepower. In 1946, he measured defeat. Now, in 1953, he measures time, the one resource no empire can reproduce. In his final interview before his death, Schultz was asked what lesson he took from the war. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once traced the perfection of a foreign engine, and said, "Civilizations don't fall because their soldiers are weak. They fall because their leaders are too proud to see when the numbers have already turned against them." He smiled faintly. The Americans built engines. We built illusions. One kept running. The film fades to silence. Only the faint echo of machinery remains, not of war, but of history continuing to turn its gears.